This week's Parashas Noach, begins with Noach ish Tzaddik, and the Mefarshim, the commentators, point out, although there are many tzaddikim throughout the Tanakh and Jewish history, and perhaps even today, there's only two people that the Torah calls in Tanakh is known as tzaddik, and that's Noach HaTzaddik, as in the beginning of this week's parsha, as well as Yosef HaTzaddik. So Yosef and Noach are the two that are known as tzaddikim. There are many other great Nevi'im and people, Moshe Rabbeinu, Abraham, Yitzchak, but Noach and Yosef is known as the tzaddikim. So what is the common denominator between Noach and Yosef? Why are Noach and Yosef called tzaddik? So the Mefarshim explain, because what they have in common is they saved the whole world. That Noach, the world was destroyed with the flood, and he went in the ark, and then he came out, and he rebuilt the whole world. He was the one responsible. As well as Yosef, during the famine, he saved all the food. Everyone had to come to him from all over to get food to eat. So we see Yosef and Noach have the same thing in common, that they both sustain the world. How do we know that one who sustains the world is considered a tzaddik? So that's what we say every time in davening, 3 times a day in the Ashrei. Poseach es yadecha umatzbiya l'chol chayratzon. That God, you open up your hand and satisfy all the living creatures. Tzaddik Hashem l'chol derachav. God, you're a tzaddik. So we see from here that it's like God sustains the world daily, all the time, constantly. He's constantly sustaining the world, and tzaddik Hashem. That's why Noach and Yosef warranted the label tzaddik, because they also, at different times in Jewish history, or in the history of the world, they saved the world. Noach, when he came out of the Teva, and Yosef with the famine. So in the beginning of the parsha, it talks about the Dor HaMabul, the flood and the terrible crimes that they committed, and God was just getting fed up, and he went ahead and he told Noach that he's going to bring the flood and destroy the world. So Noach went around and told all the people. They all laughed at him. No one really took him seriously, and we know the rest is history. The flood came and destroyed the world. So we know there are many different averas, avodah zarah, gilui arayis. They're involved in the cardinal sins, idol worship, illicit relations. So you'd expect, why did God destroy the world? Because of those averas. Yet, I'm sure they definitely played a role. But Rashi quotes the famous Chazal, what was the final straw? What brought the Mabul? Well, nichtam gzar dinam el ha-gezel. It was the avera of gezel, of robbery, of a bunch of thieves, that brought the final decree. And we know the different chazals that they went ahead and used to steal pachos mishava pruta, less than a certain amount, that based in you couldn't take someone to court. It was gezel. But no matter what, it seems very difficult. Gezel seems like minor leagues. The CFL to the NFL, minor leagues to major averas. Like gezel is bad, but avodah zarah, gilui arayis, we know those are the part of the big 3 things you give up your life for. So why was it? What's the pshat that it was nektam gzar dinam al ha-gezel? And in fact, we know, even though it's true, as we learn in Pirkei Avos, we don't know schar of mitzvahs because we don't want to trample over the mitzvahs kalas. Nevertheless, we could look at the onshin, at the punishments of certain sins, and we could figure out what are quote-unquote more important and less important. Things that are liable to the death penalty, we could pick up that they're probably a little more serious. Those that have lesser penalties are probably not as severe. So what does it mean that we don't really know? So we do have some idea. And in fact, Gezel, in fact, is something you don't even get marcus on. You don't even get a good old-fashioned whooping. Why not? Well, because the Talmud tells us Gezel is a lav hanitak liase. Gezel is a lav, is a negative commandment that can be rectified with a positive act. There's a mitzvah of a heishiv et hagezela, and you return the stolen object. So since you could rectify the avera, so therefore Gezel doesn't even come with an onish. So what's going on? And we know Avodah Zarah, Gila Rayas come with severe penalties. Gezel doesn't come with any onish. Not that it's permitted, but it doesn't have that straw. It doesn't have any onish, and certainly not the onish of Avodah Zarah and Gila Rayas. So what's pshat of Zarah Gazar Dinan El Agzeya? Why was the final straw on Gezel? There's a famous Meshach Chochma, actually in Parshas Beshalach, where he makes a fundamental distinction. He says there's a fundamental distinction between the individual, the Yachid, and when we're dealing with the Rabbim. When you're dealing with the individual, and when you're dealing with the community. We know, in a positive sense, we know there's a concept of mitzvah the Rabbim. There's a famous Gemara in Brachas that Rebbe Lezer came to shul and he really wanted to have a minyan, and he came, there were only 9 and his Eved Kanani, so he went ahead and freed his slave. Because of Eved Kanani, it's not like the Avadim, it's not like Lincoln freeing the slaves. The Torah doesn't condone that type of slavery. It's a special halacha of Avdus we don't have today. But Eved Kanani is a quasi-Jew, and when you free him, they go to the mikvah, he becomes a full-fledged Jew, and he can count for the minyan. So the Gemara asked, how could he free his slave? Well, Mahem Tavod, there's a prohibition, there's an Isser Aseh, he can't free his slave. So the Gemara says, but he's doing it for a mitzvah. But the Gemara says, we have a principle, mitzvah baba aveira. If you steal the daled minim, the lulav and esrog, not only haven't you fulfilled the mitzvah of daled minim, but you've also violated the aveira of gezel. So who cares? It's a mitzvah baba aveira. No, but the Gemara concludes, no, mitzvah derabim shani, a public mitzvah is different. So we see there's a concept of a mitzvah derabim. We also find it by the concept of avelis, or no avelis, I should say, on Yontif. The Gemara says in Moed Katan, the mitzvah derabim of Simchas Yontif beats out the private mitzvah of mourning. And it's a machlokas, Rambam and Tosfos, what type of mitzvah is Simchas Yontif is manaz. The Rambam's opinion is Simchas Yontif is still a mitzvah in our Torah today, and therefore the way the Rambam learns the Gemara, we have a public biblical mitzvah of Simchas Yontif versus a private, because the Rambam's opinion is Avelos Yom Rishon is Daraisa as well. So the public mitzvah of Simcha overrides the private mitzvah of mourning. And Tosfos is also consistent with his view. He says we no longer have a mitzvah Simcha today. There's only a Simcha when there's a Beis HaMikdash with the Karbanos. Today Simcha is only D'Rabbanan, but the sheet of Tosfos, and this is the Minig Ashkenaz, that all Avelos is only D'Rabbanan, even Avelos Yom Rishon. And the way Tosfos learns the Gemara, the mitzvah D'Rabim, D'Rabbanan, the public rabbinical mitzvah of Simchas Yontif beats out the private rabbinical mitzvah of Avelos. So what the question comes up is, that it's not an uncommon shayla, someone dies during Chol Hamoed. So you do the kfura right away, but the Avelos doesn't begin until Yom Tov Acharon, until after Yom Tov's over. So the question is, what do you mean, when is Yom Tov over? What about Yom Tov Sheni? The last day, let's say Simchas Torah and Chutz La'aretz. So, according to the Rambam, the Sfardim, Yom Tov Sheni, according to everyone, Yom Tov Sheni, it's a rabbinical mitzvah of simcha. However, Avelos Yom Rishon is Doraisa. So what wins? A public rabbinical mitzvah versus a private biblical mitzvah. According to the Ramah and the Minhag Ashkenaz, it's not an issue because they're both Rabbanan. So the public mitzvah of Yantiv beats out the private rabbinical mitzvah of Avela. So it's not a shiloh according to Minhag Ashkenaz. It's a machlokas in the Rishonim whether you begin Avelis on the Yantiv Acharon. So we know halacha k'divrei ha-mekel ba'avelos. We're mekel when it comes, we're lenient when it comes to the laws of mourning. So in the different minhagim, but some of the minhag is that you count Simchas Torah as day one, but you don't start sitting Shiva until afterward, different minhagim. But the point being here is we see that the concept of mitzvah derabim, perhaps even a mitzvah derabim derabanan, beats out a biblical private mitzvah. That's a discussion, but we see from the Gemara that the concept of, even though a regular mitzvah, we apply the principle of mitzvah ba'avera, and if you steal something, not only don't you get the mitzvah, but you get an avera. However, it's a mitzvah derabim, so then we don't apply the general principle of, so we see the concept of rabbim. So the Meshach Chachma points out there's a fundamental difference between the yachid and the rabbim. When we talk about onshin, avodah zara, gila arayis, chilul Shabbos, all the severe onshin, we're talking to as individuals. To an individual, as the Mishnah tells us, and we know the halachas, they're very severe onshin, chayiv misa, skila, etc. However, when it comes to midos, when it comes to the tzibur, ben adam l'chaveiro, commandments, interpersonal relations, how to deal with your fellow human and fellow Jew, so we see it's a totally different measuring stick. The Meshach Chachma points out, when it comes to even avodah zara and the terrible averas, God, when we deal with the individual, that's a separate issue. But when you're dealing with the tzibur, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God has much more patience getting over when the Jews are involved in different areas of avodah zara, etc. And therefore he has a lot more patience and he's willing to give them more time to do tshuva. However, when it comes to the Jewish people involved in midos roles, no achdus, fighting among each other, machlokes, that God has zero tolerance. That's the phrase, there is zero tolerance. When it comes to sins, ben adam l'chaveiro, God has very little tolerance when people are involved in those type of averas. And that's what the Meshach Chachma points out. Look at the difference between the Doro Shel David was Tzadikim, yet they didn't get along with one another, and therefore they were punished. But the Doro Shel Achav, who were all day avodah zara, but there was achdus, so then they were successful in different arenas. Or, as we all know, the difference between Churban Bayis Rishon and Churban Bayis Sheni. Churban, by the destruction of the first temple, that was because of the big three: illicit relations, avodah zara, etc., Yitzicha. But the second Beis HaMikdash was because of sinas chinam. Sins ben adam achaveros, midos, unwarranted hatred. So we see, look at the Onish. The first, how long did it take God to forgive us? 70 years we started rebuilding the second Beis HaMikdash. However, for sinas chinam, we're still waiting. We still haven't begun to build the third Beis HaMikdash. As Rav Kukko points out, if sinas chinam was the cause of the destruction of the second temple, in order to rebuild the third temple, we need avas chinam. We have to go to the opposite extreme. So we see again that for avodah zara, gila arayis, HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave us after 70 years. We could rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. But sins ben adam l'chaveiro, sinas chinam, machlokas, that we're still waiting on. Or as they point out, the distinction between the cheda ego and the cheda maraglim. The cheda ego, avodah zara. So Moshe came down, they broke the luchos, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave us. But the Morsin and the Meraglim speaking Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, Eretz Yisrael, and being a kafay tova, not appreciating all the good that God did, that they weren't forgiven on, they were punished, and they weren't able to enter the land of Israel. And that's the distinction as well between the Dor HaMabul and the Dor HaFlaga. We have at the end of the parsha the generation that wanted to build a tower up to heaven, and different explanations we'll get to show what they wanted to do. But the Dor HaMabul was, what was the sin? The sin was B'nadam Chaveiro. They didn't treat each other properly. Dor HaFlaga was against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They wanted to wage war on God. So what was God's reaction? In the Dor HaFlaga, he just laughed at them. It was a joke, like they want to shoot arrows at me. But B'nadam Chaveiro, Dor HaMabul, he wasn't laughing. He was willing, and he was willing to destroy the world for it. So that's what the Meshach Chochmah says. Well, Nichtam Zardinav El Al Gezel, that's the final straw. When it comes to a Yachid, so then you're right. The Avodah Zarah, Gil Arayas, they're very, very severe, and there are many severe punishments that come with it. But when you're dealing with the Tzibor, God can have patience. He's not happy, but he can still dwell in your midst while still worshipping idols and still hoping and waiting for them to do tshuva. But when God sees that there's no achas, not to what happened during Purim as well, that's what Haman said to Achashverosh, Yeshnu Am Echad. Mefuzah, the Jewish people are fighting with each other. Now's the time to make the decree, Lahashmin Laharagas Kol Yehudim. And that's what the Meshach Chochmah is. When it comes to Midos, with Klal Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu is zero tolerance, and hence it wasn't on Avodah Zarah, but Nichtam Zardinam Elah HaGezel, and that's the final straw when it comes to Midos. And B'nadam Chaveiro, when you're dealing with the Tzibor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a very low tolerance level, and therefore even willing to destroy the world over it. And just to conclude, as we learn at the end of the parsha, there's a very interesting chazal. The Medrash tells us whatever happened to the tower, to the Dor HaFlaga, the generation that built the tower, whatever happened to it. So there's an interesting Medrash. The Medrash says, you know what happened to it? A third of it was burnt. A third of it was sunk underneath the ground, and it pops up every once in a while. And a third of it is still around. You know how tall a third of the tower is? If you go on top of the tower and look down, the palm trees look like grasshoppers. So what's pshat in the Chazal? I don't think Chazal were telling us that they actually saw the tower. A third of it was actually burned, a third was left. So I heard a very interesting explanation from one of my Rabbi, Rav Nissen Alpert Zatzal, who lived on the Lower East Side at Talmud Muvak of Rav Moshe Feinstein. He points out the Chazal are telling us the code here. What exactly was going on? That, in fact, Chazal tell us what was the motivation behind the Dor HaFlaga. So they give different explanation. One was they wanted to have a universal peace. They wanted to have everyone to talk the same language and all to be together. The lowest common denominator was to be together. The other explanations, the motivation was they wanted to have a fight against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They wanted to go up and take over, shoot arrows and missiles at God and take over. And the third explanation is it was more derech hateva. They figured out that every X amount of years the heavens can't hold the waters in it, because we saw what happened with the flood, and therefore we have to go up and solidify the heavens. So these three different approaches, Rav Alpert explains, this is what Chazal are telling us here. A third of the tower was destroyed. That's talking about the concept of people fighting wars against God. No one fights wars against God, whether Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, or you pick out the wacko, they all have God on their side. No one fights against God. Every crazy person has God fighting on his side. That's destroyed. We don't have that concept anymore. The third that sunk up and pops up once in a while, we have the concept, the League of Nations, United Nations. Every once in a while people come together, they want to join, they think they're going to bring world peace, they have the different ideas, but then they lose the credibility and it's all over. That's the third that's sunk underneath. It sinks down and once in a while they pop up and then they sink back under. But what's the third that is still around, that it's so high that if you look down from the third of the tower, the palm trees look like grasshoppers? That's attributing miracles to Derech HaTeva. That when God does a miracle, to say it was His nature. What was the reaction after Noah went around for 120 years and told them, you know what, if you don't do tshuva, if you don't repent, God's going to bring a flood and destroy the world? And what happened? He did, and Noah was saved. So what would you expect the generation would say? Obviously we know there's a God and He brought the flood and we better get our act together. Instead the reaction was, no, let's build a tower, we have to solidify the heavens because there's going to be another flood soon and we have to protect ourselves. The greater the miracle, the higher the tower, the more they turn the palm tree into the grasshopper. They turn the great miracle into a derech hateva. In fact, that's why we know Kriyas Yamsuf is known as the prototype of all miracles. Why is Kriyas Yamsuf the prototype of all miracles? There are many miracles. So why is Kriyas Yamsuf known as the prototype? And there are many miracles that are greater kochos. So the commentators explain, because what's the greatness of Kriyas Yamsuf? It's the association with the divine. That it's what happened after Kriyas Yamsuf. It's Vayaminu v'Hashem v'Moshe Abdo. And they had Amunah in God and Moshe's servant, Az Yashim Moshe. The greatness of Kriyas Yamsuf was they recognized that the miracle was from by God. It wasn't some natural occurrence, and they attributed the miracle to God. In fact, that's what they say by Eliyahu, by Har Carmel. He said, Aneni Hashem Aneni. Answer me, God, answer me. Why the double language of answer me? Aneni Hashem Aneni. So Aneni, God, bring me down the fire. Let me win this battle with the old Avodah Zarah. But I know people could see miracles in front of them and nothing happens. Now it's not enough Aneni that a miracle is going to happen. But Aneni Hashem Aneni, make sure Klal Yisrael sees it as a miracle when they do tshuva. And that's the yesod of Kriyas Yamsuf. And that's what happened. No matter all the great miracles that happened with Noah and the flood and he survived, nevertheless, the next generation, they attributed the flood to nature. And that's the third of the tower that's still around, and that's what we have to work on today. We have to realize that whether it's the everyday miracles or the miracles that happen once in a while, we have to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does miracles all the time. We have to recognize God's greatness every day and not turn those miracles into some acts of nature. Just to summarize, we discussed Noach Ish Tzaddik, the difference between Noach and Yosef. They both saved the world. And how do we know someone who saves the world? So Tzaddik So we see one who saves the world is a Tzaddik by God, and that was Moshe, that was Noach, and that was Yosef. Then we discussed the Meshach Chochmah, and we elaborated on it. Why on Geza? Why not on Avodah Zarah? Because when it comes to Yechidim, then Avodah Zarah, Giorayis are very severe penalties. But when it comes to Klal Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could still dwell within Klal Yisrael even when they're Odei Avodah Zarah. What He can't tolerate, zero tolerance, is on Averis Ben Adam Chavero. That's the Dor HaMabul. And the Dor HaFlagel He laughs at, but the Dor HaMabul He destroys. And that's the pshat, the pshat in the Dor HaFlagel, what happened to the tower, the third that was burnt, the third that was sunk into the ground, and the third that still remained. The third that was burned, no one fights wars with HaKadosh Baruch Hu anymore. Everyone has God on their side. The third that's sunk down, it pops up once in a while, that's the League of Nations, United Nations, other people that try, they're claiming they're looking for world peace. But the third that's still around today, and you look down from the palm trees and look at them like the palm trees look like grasshoppers, that's attributing all of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's nisim to Derech HaTeva.